They said it was just a road. That's how it all started. A quiet whisper in the neighborhood, followed by the low rumble of construction trucks and the sharp noise of heavy equipment. At first I thought they were fixing something nearby. Maybe some new pipes or repaving a street. But I was wrong. Very wrong. I live on a ranch. It's not massive, but it's been in my family for years. We've worked the land, cared for it, and respected its peace. The idea of someone building anything on it, without asking, never crossed my mind. It was mine. Simple as that. Then one morning I noticed tire tracks near the back fence. Deep ones. And a patch of the field had been cleared, freshly leveled. That area had always been untouched. No one ever went back there except for me and my dogs. So I drove over to check it out, and what I saw made my stomach drop. There was a full crew. Bulldozers, survey markers, and concrete forms already going in. They were laying the base for a road. Right through my land. No call, no letter, no heads up. Just action. I parked and walked over, trying to stay calm. I asked one of the guys what was going on. He looked confused and just said, "We're with the HOA. This is part of the new access project." He pointed toward the nearby subdivision. Apparently they were building a shortcut, something to make it easier for residents to get to the main road. Faster commutes, better flow, that kind of thing. But I didn't live in that subdivision. I had no part in their HOA. My land wasn't part of their community. Yet here they were, digging into it like they owned the place. I asked who approved it, who signed off, who gave them permission. No one had answers, just shrugs and, "We're just doing what we were told." Now here's the part that still makes my blood boil. When I called the HOA office expecting some kind of mistake, the woman on the line was calm. Almost too calm. She said they had legal precedent, and that the road had been planned for years. I asked how they thought they had the right to use my land. She said something about public good and shared infrastructure. I reminded her, this is private land. Always has been. She didn't care. So I blocked the construction. Put up signs. Fenced off the area again. I even parked one of my tractors in the middle of their work zone. I wasn't trying to fight, not yet. I just wanted them to stop long enough to talk about it like adults. Instead, a few days later I got served. A lawsuit. From the HOA. Claiming that I was interfering with their legal right to build. That I was obstructing community development. That I was damaging their project. They were suing me for protecting my own property. I wish I could say I was shocked. But honestly I wasn't. I dealt with bullies before. I just never thought I'd see one hiding behind an HOA letterhead. At that point it was clear, this wasn't just about a road. This was about power, about entitlement, and about someone thinking they could walk all over me just because they thought I wouldn't fight back. They were wrong. So, I did what anyone in my position would do. I lawyered up. I went digging through every file, every deed, every scrap of paper tied to my land. Because if they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. I didn't always live on this ranch, but the moment I found it, I knew it was home. It wasn't just land to me, it was a promise. A quiet place far from traffic, far from noise, and far from people who think they can tell you what to do with what's yours. I bought it years ago with money I'd saved for most of my life. It was a dream I finally made real. The land was beautiful. Open skies, long stretches of pasture, a few old trees that stood like guardians near the fence lines. There was a small barn and a worn-down cabin when I bought it, and I fixed both up with my own hands. Over time I added a workshop, a chicken coop, and a few goats. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Every inch of it. I kept to myself. I didn't bother anyone and no one bothered me. The nearest subdivision was maybe a 10-minute drive away, far enough that I never thought twice about it. I knew it was one of those HOA-run places, where everything had to be approved by a committee. Matching mailboxes. No boats in driveways. That kind of thing. But their world wasn't my world. That's what I always thought. Looking back, maybe I missed the signs. A few years ago they started expanding. New houses went up fast. The kind of development where trees disappear overnight and new streets pop up like someone's playing SimCity. Still, I didn't worry. My land was separate, untouched, and protected by a recorded deed with clear boundaries. Or so I thought. I first heard about the so-called Access Project through a neighbor who had property a mile north of mine. He mentioned a plan floating around about a shortcut road. Said it would make things easier for emergency vehicles and cut down travel time for the HOA folks. I didn't think much of it until I saw where that road was headed. Right through the back end of my ranch. That area wasn't just unused land. It was part of my livestock rotation. I had fencing there, irrigation lines, and native grasses I'd worked hard to restore. And more than that, it was private. It wasn't a trail. It wasn't a right-of-way. It was mine. So when I realized they were actually building on it, not asking, not even notifying me, I knew something was seriously wrong. And when I say they built fast, I mean it. Within a week, they had flattened a section of my pasture, put down gravel, and staked out the next stretch. They weren't hesitating. I spent hours pacing that area, walking the fence line, trying to figure out how it could have happened. I checked my land survey, the property map, the county records. Everything matched. No public easement. No shared access. No legal justification. Nothing. Still, the HOA acted like it was already decided. Like I didn't matter. One of their board members even told me, "It's just a road. You'll barely notice it." That's when I realized what they thought of me. They didn't see a landowner. They saw a bump in their plan, someone to push past. I stood there for a long time that night, just watching the lights from their construction trucks flicker in the distance. My land was being carved up, and I hadn't agreed to a single thing. They thought I'd give in. Stay quiet. Let it slide. They didn't know me at all. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun hadn't even cleared the trees, but I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. I stepped outside with a cup of coffee and looked across the field toward where the road crew had been working. The sound of heavy equipment was already echoing through the still air. I could feel it in my chest. I didn't waste time. I grabbed my phone, took pictures of the damage they'd done to the land, the tire tracks, the disturbed soil, the markers still stuck in the ground. Then I got in my truck and drove straight to the site. I parked across what they were calling the future roadway, blocking the machines. I didn't come to fight, not yet, but I needed answers. A foreman walked over. Friendly enough. He told me they were just following plans from the HOA and that everything had been approved through the proper channels. I asked him, plain and simple, "Did anyone show you a document saying this is public land?" He paused, looked away. That's when I knew they were working on assumptions, not facts. He gave me the number of someone on the HOA board, said I should talk to them. So I did. I made the call, thinking maybe this was all just a massive misunderstanding. Maybe someone filed the wrong paperwork or had outdated maps. But the woman who answered didn't sound apologetic. She sounded confident. Too confident. Like she'd had this conversation before and didn't care how it went. She said the HOA had reviewed old development plans that showed a future road through the area, and they believed they had a right to complete the infrastructure. I asked her if she had a copy of those plans. She said that was internal HOA documentation. When I told her this was private property, clearly marked and recorded in the county database, she barely reacted. Said if I had an issue, I should take it up with the court. That was the moment I realized they had already prepared for a fight. They didn't ask. They didn't knock. They just moved forward and assumed I'd roll over. I walked back to my truck, still blocking the road, and sat there for a long while. Every time I thought about moving it, something stopped me. A feeling deep in my gut. This wasn't just about principle anymore. This was personal. They were trying to take something that didn't belong to them, and they were doing it so casually, like I was invisible. That day, I went home and wrote a formal letter. I attached photos, maps, deed records, everything I could find. I sent it to the HOA board, their property management company, and the county. I wanted it on record. I also put up signs at the edge of my land, private property. No trespassing. Then I locked the gates. I figured that might slow things down. I was wrong. 3 days later, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. He was polite, almost embarrassed, as he handed me a thick envelope. I opened it while he stood there. Inside was a civil complaint. The HOA was suing me, claiming I was blocking legal access to a community road and interfering with public development. I stood on my porch holding those papers, reading every line, barely able to believe it. They weren't backing down. They were coming after me on my own land as if I was the one trespassing. I watched the deputy drive off. The dust from his tires settled over the gravel road like fog. That's when it hit me, they were trying to rewrite the rules. And they picked the wrong man to do it too. I wasn't going to sit back and let them steamroll me, literally or legally. The day after getting served, I cleared off the kitchen table and started building a case. I wasn't a lawyer, but I wasn't stupid either. I knew enough to understand that property rights don't just vanish because someone wants a shortcut. The first thing I did was drive down to the county recorder's office. I asked for every document tied to my land. Deeds, surveys, historical plats, anything they had. The clerk looked a little surprised when I told her why I needed it. "They built a road?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. "Through private land." She shook her head and pulled the files. Hours later, I had a stack of papers in the passenger seat, and as soon as I got home I spread them out across the table. There it was in black and white, my property lines. Fully enclosed. No mention of easements, no shared rights of way. Nothing. Just solid boundaries. I also found something interesting, an old note in the records about a proposed access route from back in the 90s. But the plan had never been finalized, never approved, and never recorded officially. That was probably what the HOA was clinging to. A rough draft. A dream someone had decades ago, but it never turned into reality. I called a real estate lawyer the next morning. Explained everything. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "They're suing you for blocking them from using your own land?" I said yes. He let out a short laugh, but it wasn't the funny kind. "This is gonna be messy," he said. "But don't worry. You've got the law on your side." He helped me file a countersuit. Trespassing. Property damage. Violation of private property rights. I wasn't just defending myself anymore, I was going on the offensive. I wanted the court to know exactly what they had done, and I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. While we were preparing the paperwork, the HOA kept pushing forward like nothing had happened. Even with my gate locked and my signs posted, they kept sending crews to the edge of my property. One day, I caught a worker trying to climb over the fence to check something. I stopped him and told him flat out, "The next time anyone steps foot on my land without permission, I'm calling the sheriff." That got their attention. A few days later, I received an offer. Not from a lawyer, not through the court, just a basic letter from the HOA asking if I'd consider compromising to avoid unnecessary conflict. They said they'd finish the road and restore the land afterward, and even offered a small settlement for the temporary use of space. Made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so arrogant. They thought a couple of grand and a pat on the back would make me forget they invaded my land, disrespected my rights, and tried to bully me with legal threats. I didn't even respond. I passed it to my lawyer and told him, "Let them bring everything they've got." The next few weeks were a blur of legal filings, back and forth letters, and mounting tension. My lawyer was calm, experienced, and relentless. He kept telling me, "This isn't about what they planned to do. It's about what they actually did. And they messed up big time." I spent every evening walking my property, looking at the broken ground where they tried to force their way through. Every tire mark and torn-up patch of grass reminded me what was at stake. They wanted a fight. Now they had one. The court date finally arrived, and I won't lie, I was nervous. It wasn't that I doubted the truth. I had the records, the maps, the legal backing. But still, standing in front of a judge, going up against a whole HOA with their own lawyers and paperwork, it was something else entirely. We walked into the courtroom, me and my attorney, carrying a file box filled with every document tied to that land. The HOA had a team of 3. One of them nodded at me like we were neighbors meeting at the mailbox. I didn't nod back. The judge was calm and direct. She asked both sides to make their case. The HOA's lawyer went first. He laid out their argument, that the road had been on development plans for decades, that it would benefit the broader community, and that the section running through my property was critical to completing the project. He even used the phrase, "greater good." I remember that clearly. Then he pulled out a map. It was old, yellowed with faded lines. He pointed to a dotted path running through what would now be my field. "This," he said, "was the original planned easement." My lawyer stood up without even glancing at the map. "Was it recorded?" he asked. The HOA lawyer hesitated. "It was proposed." "But was it recorded with the county?" My lawyer cut in. There was a pause. Then, "No." That pause was everything. Because here's the thing, a proposal means nothing without follow-through. Plans don't trump ownership. The judge knew that. And now the HOA knew we knew it too. Then it was our turn. My lawyer laid everything out, calmly and clearly. The deed. The survey. The official maps. All marked, sealed, recorded, and clean. No public access, no shared rights, no easement ever filed or granted. Just solid legal ownership going back years. He showed photos of the damage. Described how they started construction without permission, how they ignored my warnings and offers to talk, how they escalated things by filing a lawsuit instead of seeking a real solution. Then he handed the judge a letter. It was from the original developer, the one who created the subdivision years ago. We had tracked him down. In it, he stated that while a road through my land was considered during early planning, it was dropped completely due to zoning and legal constraints. That was the nail in the coffin. The judge didn't say much right away. She asked a few more questions. Looked through the documents again. Then she leaned back, folded her hands, and spoke one sentence that changed everything. This appears to be a clear violation of private property. Just like that. No drawn-out speech. No dramatic ruling. Just the truth, plain and simple. And that truth was on my side. The courtroom went quiet. The HOA's lawyers whispered among themselves. My lawyer just looked at me and nodded, like, that's it. We left that day knowing we'd won something bigger than just a legal case. We'd stopped them from setting a dangerous example. One where big groups can take what they want and hope no one fights back. But it wasn't over yet. Not entirely. Because while the judge made her position clear, there were still consequences to settle. Damages. Cleanup. Boundaries that needed to be respected moving forward. And I wasn't about to let them off the hook without fixing what they broke. They had tried to rewrite the rules. Now it was time to rewrite the ending. After the judge made her ruling, the courtroom emptied out fast. The HOA team didn't hang around. No handshakes, no words, just a quick pack up and a quiet exit. I watched them leave not with anger but with a kind of calm. They'd pushed hard, played dirty and lost. And now, finally, it was my turn to make things right. The next step was damages. My lawyer filed a motion asking for compensation. Not just for the physical damage to the land, the torn fencing, the ruined pasture, the bulldozer tracks cutting across my field, but for legal fees, time lost, and the stress of being dragged into a battle I never asked for. The HOA sent their own counteroffer. A small check and a letter saying they were sorry for the misunderstanding. That word again, misunderstanding. As if tearing through private property and suing the landowner was just a little mistake. I didn't even read the whole thing. I slid the check back across the table and told my lawyer, no. Not even close. He agreed. So we pressed forward. We also demanded a formal agreement, legally binding, that the HOA would never attempt to build anything on my land again. No access roads. No pathways. No utilities. Nothing. I wanted it in writing, signed and stamped and filed with the county. They resisted at first. Tried to say it wasn't necessary. That after the judge's ruling, they had no plans to continue development in my direction. But I wasn't interested in promises. I'd seen how fast their plans could change. I wanted protection that didn't disappear the next time a new board took over. It took a few weeks but they finally gave in. Signed the documents, acknowledged my property lines, and agreed to pay a much larger settlement. Enough to fix what they broke, cover my legal costs and then some. It wasn't about the money though. It never was. It was about setting the record straight. Legally, permanently, publicly. Once the dust settled, I turned my attention back to the land itself. I patched the fencing. Reseeded the torn-up areas. Dug up the gravel they'd laid down and leveled the soil. It wasn't easy but it was healing. Every time I worked out there, I felt like I was taking back what they tried to claim. Neighbors started reaching out too. People I barely knew before all this. Some just wanted to say they'd heard what happened and couldn't believe it. Others had their own stories about dealing with pushy HOAs. One guy told me he'd been fined for having a shed the wrong shade of green. Another said he got written up because his grass grew half an inch too high. Their battles weren't as big as mine but the message was the same. When people get power without accountability, they abuse it. That's what this was really about. Not just land. Not just one road. But the idea that someone could look at what you built, what you worked for, and think they have more claim to it than you do. Just because they have paperwork, a board, or a bigger budget. They lost this time. And the road? It ends where my fence begins. They never finished it. It just stops. A gravel path that leads to nowhere. A reminder. A warning. Proof that standing your ground still means something. I still walk that fence line sometimes, especially in the evening when the sun sets behind the trees. The land is quiet again. Peaceful. The way it should be. And every time I walk past that broken stretch of dirt, I remember, they thought they could take it. They were wrong. Not long after the dust finally settled, I noticed something strange. The HOA wasn't done trying to worm their way in, they were just getting sneakier. They couldn't build the road anymore, not legally, but that didn't mean they stopped trying to test the boundaries. They just changed tactics. It started with letters. At first they came once a week. Plain envelopes, no return address other than Community Association Management. Inside were vague notices of interest about shared infrastructure projects. One mentioned a potential drainage plan that might intersect the southern border of your parcel. Another suggested cooperation on maintaining utility lines. Lines that didn't even run through my land. I saw right through it. These weren't about utilities or cooperation. They were probing, looking for a crack, waiting to see if I'd let my guard down. Maybe I wouldn't notice a small trench being dug. Maybe I'd ignore a service truck pulling up one morning. Maybe they were hoping to get lucky. They didn't. I sent each letter straight to my lawyer. We added every one to the growing file. He told me, this is how they work. They lose in court, then try to win by paperwork and persistence. I told him they were going to get tired long before I did. Then came the visits. A few weeks later, I spotted a man parked just outside my property line. SUV, tinted windows, clipboard in hand. He sat there for over an hour, occasionally getting out to take photos of the field. Not a utility worker. No uniform. No markings. Just standing there watching. I walked over. Calm but firm. Can I help you? He gave me a polite smile. Said he was surveying for a community access study. I asked who sent him. He said, the association. I told him plainly, that land is private. You're trespassing the second you step 1 foot past this fence. He left without argument. But I knew there'd be more. By now I had motion cameras up. New gates with reinforced locks. Signs posted everywhere, not just no trespassing, but legal notices referencing the court ruling. I wasn't taking chances. It might sound extreme, but once someone's tried to take your land, trust doesn't come back easily. I'd seen how far they were willing to go the first time. I wasn't about to let them set the stage for a second round. Then just when I thought they'd finally given up, they held a public HOA meeting and brought up my land again. A neighbor who lived just outside the subdivision tipped me off. Said the board was discussing options, and even floated the idea of petitioning the county for a zoning reevaluation. They were trying to reframe the issue. Make it seem like I was the problem, like my private land was an obstacle in the way of progress. They weren't just after the road anymore. They wanted to chip away at the legitimacy of my ownership. Rewrite the story. So I showed up. Not to the HOA meeting, I wasn't invited, but to the next county meeting. I brought copies of the ruling, a statement from my lawyer, and photo evidence of the harassment I'd dealt with since the verdict. I didn't raise my voice. I just laid out the facts. The room got quiet. Real quiet. The county board made it clear, the matter had already been settled in court. Any attempt to revive the issue would be treated as a legal violation, not a zoning request. I left that meeting the same way I left the courthouse, calm, steady, and still standing. They didn't like that I fought back. But they really hated that I won. The season started to change again. The fields greened up, the air turned crisp, and life slowed back to normal, or at least as close as it could after everything. But even with the quiet, I never let my guard down. It's funny how quickly you learn to watch over what's yours once someone tries to take it from you. I kept my routines tight. Checked the fence lines every other day. Walked the boundary, sometimes just out of habit, sometimes because I spotted fresh tire marks near the edge of the gravel road they never finished. I'd stop, crouch down, and look. They weren't from my truck. Someone was still poking around. Not regularly, not like before, but just enough to remind me the HOA wasn't finished. They hadn't come back with bulldozers or blueprints. But I could feel it in the air, something unsettled. That kind of arrogance doesn't go away after one loss. It hides, waits, looks for new angles. Then one evening I got a call from a neighbor I'd spoken with a few times since all this started. Real decent guy. He told me the HOA had sent out a survey to residents. The wording was vague, but it hinted at community connectivity, emergency access, and shared land solutions. All code. They were trying to stir support for reopening the conversation about the road, just without saying it directly. I wasn't surprised, but I was tired. Tired of the games, the whispers, the constant need to defend something that was already mine by law. I talked to my lawyer again. He said, it's harassment by paperwork. A slow drip. They're hoping you'll just eventually stop caring. I wasn't going to stop. So I wrote a letter, public, short, and direct. I mailed it to the HOA, but I also sent copies to every homeowner on the outskirts of the subdivision. No threats, no legal language, just a reminder of what had already happened and why I'd stood my ground. I wrote asterisk, this land isn't for sale. It's not shared. It's not negotiable. I fought this battle not to cause trouble, but to protect what's mine. I hope no one ever has to go through it again. Asterisk. I included a picture. Just one. The unfinished road, ending in a patch of weeds and tall grass. A road to nowhere. Their mistake, plain as day. I didn't hear back officially, but I know the message landed. A few of the neighbors wrote me personal notes, some with words of support, others just thanking me for pushing back. Turns out, I wasn't the only one they tried to pressure over the years. I was just the one who took it all the way. That unfinished road? It's still there. And now it's grown over almost completely. Nature's taking it back one weed at a time. I don't mow that patch. I let it stay wild. A reminder in case they ever think about trying again. I learned a lot through all this. Not just about law or land but about people. How some will smile to your face while drawing lines across your property behind closed doors. And how others, quiet folks mostly, will stand with you when the time comes. Some fights you choose. Others come knocking whether you're ready or not. This one found me. But I stood tall and I'm still standing. One afternoon, months after things had finally settled down, I got a knock on the door. It wasn't a delivery and it wasn't someone I recognized. He was in a dress shirt, holding a leather folder, standing just off the porch like he was trying not to look too comfortable. I opened the door slowly, waited for him to speak first. He introduced himself as a representative from a regional property development company. Said his team had taken an interest in the area. They were looking at expanding housing nearby and had heard about the disagreement with the HOA. He was very polite. Very smooth. Almost too smooth. Then he opened that folder and slid a sheet of paper toward me. It was an offer. A serious one. High six figures just for the small strip of land they needed to connect the development to the old subdivision. Not the whole ranch, just that narrow road-shaped slice they'd been after all along. He said it wouldn't affect the rest of my property. That it would increase accessibility for the growing community. That it might even raise my own property value. I didn't say anything at first. Just stood there looking at the paper then back at him. He smiled like he'd already won. Like the check was as good as signed. Then I asked one question. Are you working with the HOA? He hesitated. Too long. Then said, we've had conversations with a few of their board members, yes. That was enough. I handed the paper back and told him no. Not interested. Not now, not ever. He didn't argue. Just nodded like he'd expected it, thanked me for my time and walked off. Drove away in a black SUV, the same kind I'd seen idling near my fence all those months ago. They hadn't given up. They were just outsourcing the fight now. Trying a softer touch. Instead of bulldozers and courtrooms, they thought maybe money would do the trick. It wouldn't. Because by then it wasn't about the land. Not entirely. It was about what the land stood for. About not being bought off. About not letting people with plans and power rewrite what was already decided. That offer sparked something in me. Not frustration this time, focus. I decided to put things in motion that I'd been meaning to do for a while. I called a surveyor and had the property fully remapped. Not just the boundaries but everything. Trees, trails, water access, elevation. Mapped, marked and backed up with GPS data. I had the new maps certified, recorded and notarized. Then I built a website. Simple, just a page or two showing that the land was private, clearly marked with legal documentation to prove it. That way, if anyone ever searched the parcel online again, whether they were with a developer, a real estate group or an HOA looking for a second chance, they'd hit a wall right away. A wall made of records, rulings and receipts. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was locking it down so tight they'd need a crowbar and a miracle to try anything again. Word spread fast. And after that website went live, the calls stopped. The letters stopped. No more surveys, no more unexpected visitors. Just silence. But I never got too comfortable. Because the thing about people who try to take what isn't theirs is, they don't like being told no. Not once. Not twice. Not ever.